welcome to this discussion, our first of 2022. Looking forward to a great year ahead. Today we're going to be taking on the topic of cryptocurrency trends with a panel live from Singapore. We've got terrific expert advice on the line who are going to be giving us the latest trends as they see it. Looking forward to a good interactive hour ahead. As always with PCD content, we love to hear from our viewers. We've got an audience both with us on Zoom and on YouTube. Both are able to ask questions, to fire questions at our expert panel. I will bring them to our panelists through the course of the hour. So do let us know what you're seeing, what you think, any response to the comments and the discussion as we move through this hour. So looking forward to a great discussion ahead. I've got four speakers with me on the line. I'm going to come to each of them just to ask for a brief introduction as to what their professional interest is around crypto, but also around digital assets in general and blockchain as they see it. So perhaps first of all, Mike Sim. Mike, you came up with this idea of doing this session, so I'm very grateful to you. It'd be excellent to hear, first of all, a little bit about you and your interest in this area.
Thank you, David, and PCD Club for the invitation to speak on your platform. Yeah, so my name is Mike Sim. I'm from Singapore. I'm the director of Untitled Holdings Private Limited. So I run my own fund management company. So it's just that around 7 years ago, when I was still in the banking industry, I was exposed to crypto. And that was where my colleague came to me and then they asked me about this thing called, have you heard about Bitcoin? So back then, I still recall that my colleague was asking me, Bitcoin is only like $30 back then. And wow. I don't know what is it. Yeah, fantastic. If I knew and I have bought it, now I might be a multimillionaire, but I don't know what is it. And coming from the traditional asset space, I don't know what is the foundation behind that. Then subsequently, I saw that it actually rise up to $300, rise up to $1,000, and then it goes even higher and higher. That's actually got me very interested. And then I start to look deeper and I start to research about cryptocurrency. And I realized that this is something that has a lot of use case and then it's here to stay, which actually got me very interested. And I get my hands on to buy various different cryptocurrency for the past couple of years.
Fantastic. Well, we'll get into a little bit more detail shortly. But Mike Chaim, from the legal side, be interesting to hear on your perspective on crypto, your interest in this area.
Thanks, David. I'm very grateful to the other panelists and Mike Sim for inviting me to join this event. Well, my first instance experience with cryptocurrency came in 2017. I've heard about it, and honestly, I dismissed it for most of how random it appeared to came all together. A lot of the secondary market exchanges were not licensed, they were not regulated. And honestly, a lot of the headlines that you see in the papers in 2017 was really, I'll call it adverse. And a lot of banks were also actively suspending, bank accounts that were, in some way or some form involved with cryptocurrency trading or transactions. But I think in my role as a lawyer, I think I found myself to give the topic a bit of a try, and then to reach out to the regulator on several occasions. So I think in Singapore, the Monetary Authority does have quite a wide playing field for digital payment tokens, as they call it. And I think we like to say that we see a lot of legitimate uses for cryptocurrency transactions, market exchanges, and blockchain, and we are here today.
Fantastic. We'll get into the legal issues with you, Mike, and also touch on things like family offices and other trends you're seeing. So look forward to speaking to you on that shortly. JD, welcome. It'd be great to hear a little bit on your background in this area.
Hey, David. Hey, everyone. So my name is Junde, or you can also call me JD. Great to meet everyone here today. So I am the Vice President of Sales and General Manager of Gaming at Annie, which is the global leading provider of market data and analytics for mobile apps. So I am fairly familiar with mobile app companies that have disrupted various industries over the past several years. And since 2017, I've also personally invested in blockchain projects, startups, and funds, particularly in the space of DeFi and GameFi. So personally, for me, because of my background in both mobile and blockchain, I think crypto at some stage will need to leverage mobile apps to achieve mass adoption. So I do think there's a good amount of upside in the years to come ahead.
Fantastic. Well, great to have you with us today, JD. And finally, Huiji, great to have you with us. Be wonderful to hear a little bit about your background and interest in this area.
Thank you, David. So I'm always looking from a standpoint of technology, and technology is something that I'm always very passionate about. And I think that one of the key things I always look into is what's going to happen in the next 3 to 6 years, or even 10 years in this particular space. So when I first started looking into crypto and blockchain, I was very much amazed by what blockchain could do and the fundamental concept of crypto behind it. So the idea when I first started looking is like, from a decentralized space, as well as from a core technology of blockchain, I think that this would be something that would really make a huge difference in the world moving forward. And I think we are just really at the start of everything.
Brilliant. Well, look, I look forward to getting into some of this detail, hear some of the innovation on the blockchain side with you shortly. But just to open up the conversation, going to come to Mike Sim first for a chat. You can put comments or questions for any of our panel in the chat as we move through, and I'll bring those up. But I'm just going to come to Mike Sim first. Looking on the fund management side, Mike, that's your area. But first of all, just perhaps sketch out for us your sense of the ecosystem for crypto in Singapore.
Right. Yeah. So the Singapore government has remained neutral on crypto. So as per our MD Ravi Mellon has mentioned, right? So the best approach is not to clamp them or to ban them down, right? So Singapore is actually very friendly towards business itself. So just to highlight some of the existing benefits of conducting businesses in Singapore, right? So Singapore is rated number 1 as the country most open to trade. And there are currently no dividend or capital gain taxes over here. And there's also no estate, death, or insurance tax in Singapore, right? So the corporate tax rate is kept at a flat 17% on chargeable income. Personal tax rate starts from 0 and it maxes out at 22%, which starts above 320,000, right? So I think that's fairly good. And yeah, so as of last year end, right, there's a total of 4 approved license holder under the major payments institution license by the Singapore MAS government. So there are about another 170 companies that apply for this license. So bringing the total amount that is applying for the Payment Services Act license to about 400. Yeah. Right. So I think for the crypto ecosystem space in Singapore, the government is very open for this, and it welcomes companies to send in their application. Yeah.
And I suppose you've got all the traditional infrastructure as well in terms of the international banks, the law firms and others. So I suppose that also makes it welcoming environment for the fund managers to come and establish new vehicles or to operate their business. Everything else they need is in Singapore. That's fair to say?
Right. Yeah. Correct. So with that, right, I think moving ahead, the government itself, and here we are very open. We are starting to see there's more companies and more asset managers from the traditional space coming to set up their own crypto funds. Yeah.
And what kind of strategies do you see from crypto managers? It's far from all long only strategies. People looking at the price of Bitcoin kind of rising and perhaps falling, but perhaps you could break down what you see as the key kind of strategies that fund managers are employing in this space.
Well, I think personally, I feel these fund managers, they are very adventurous. They are very courageous to step out from their traditional space to actually set this out. One thing is that first is that for Bitcoin and other virtual currency, as of 2015, right, the Commodities Exchange Act has actually placed them under commodities, right? So that is the US side. So that part we understand. But then if we look at year 2015, the entire market cap for cryptocurrency is still relatively small, right? So those fund managers, when they want to set up certain funds and to use like which kind of digital asset to invest in, right? The strategy that they deploy is also very challenging back then. right? And also there's not many service providers that is out there is willing to take out this case, because there's absolutely no use case as well, and there's no standards and framework in place. Yeah. So I actually salute those crypto managers and those service providers that has actually stepped forward many years ago, a couple of years back, to actually form and get kids started. So with that actually happening, if we look back at the year 2019, where that is the winter season for digital asset, where everything is low, right? It was also a very difficult time for these crypto fund managers as well, because we know that for asset management space, right, you need a huge AUM size in order to survive. Yeah. So these managers, they have really done they have really bite the bullet and actually braced through. So they really show everyone that if you have stayed on in an investment, if you believe in it, if you pull through that winter period, you will actually see the light at the end of the tunnel. So the last 2 years, right, we have actually see if you have stayed on in investing in digital asset currency, you have actually made the most gains, right? So coming back to your question, what are the different strategies that are being deployed by these crypto managers? So what I have seen is 4 broad strategies. Number 1 is quantitative. Then I also see there's discretionary long. There's also discretionary long short, and there's also multi strategies, right? So among all these managers itself, when it first started, like in 2016 until now, right? I see a 400% increase in the number of crypto managers. So last year end, there's about 840 of these managers. They range from hedge and VCs, right? Yeah. So what kind of investment style do they actually do? They do borrowing, they do staking, they do lending. They actually buys into using derivatives as a hedge or as an enhancing tools, right? Alpha enhancing tool. And the other thing that I noticed within their PPM is that most of them include leveraging. So we know that in traditional asset class, leveraging is a very great compounding tool when there is a bull market, right? So that's even a more assuring results that for the past 2 years, right? We see why crypto funds, they can gain such a high yield like 230% or even like 300% in a single year, right? So my takeaway for the audience is that you do your own research before you invest in these managers, right? So the 5 points that I always ask when doing the investment: number 1, does these managers have a strong team, right? Are you able to Google them? Are you able to find their team on LinkedIn? Do they have a LinkedIn profile? So number 2, are they licensed? Where are they licensed? What license do they hold? And number 3, do they have a track record? What is their investment strategy? And what is their contingency plan? As in, what happens if the market nosedive? Crypto is so volatile, right? And do they cut losses? How do they hedge? Number 4 point is, where do they transfer their money to? Where if you are investor, you want to know where are you transferring this money to, right? And what is the PPM? Is there a fund fact sheet or the subscription document that you can look at? And lastly is for $10, how much can you lose as an investor? It's easy to say that how much can I win, right? So it's during this market downtime, we won't know when is the next winter season going to come for cryptocurrency. But if it really comes, if you are heavily invested in it, are you going to pull out? Are you able to stomach that loss? So that question is very important for me to ask myself and including my investor. For $10, how much are you willing to lose? Yeah.
And on the due diligence side, then, you mentioned managers and the track record. Their track record might be very short, or their experience might be in like the equity market or something like that. How do you see that experience translating? How can people understand for new managers? What do they have to just wait and see how performance stacks up? Is there anything better than that, or what can they rely on?
Well, I think this is a very good question, and it's also depends on how big is that market size, and how many currency are there, or how are there to be traded, right? So the first thing that I will always ask myself and I will look for, right, is that the team that is being formed, that investment team. So where do they actually come from? do they have the experience running an investment fund, right? So an investment team with likelihood with traditional asset management experience will likely gain investors' trust and as well as the regulators' greater confidence, right, in running a fund. So how do I define that? Is that the investment team, it comes with like a COO, a Chief Operating Officer, and a CCO, a Chief Compliance Officer. They have been the experience in running traditional funds, and they are well versed with like those applicable rules and regulations, and also know the importance of investor protection. So that's number one, the first thing that I will actually look for. So those funds managers that I have personally known, usually their team consists of between 10 to 21 members, their team members, and their experience range like 20 to 60 years total combined experience, right? Yeah. So with that, then we look down into like the cryptocurrency itself. What kind of crypto do they actually invest in? What kind of strategy do they invest in? Do they just buy Bitcoin and then they just hold it there? That I can also do myself.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. I mean, and then moving on, so from the institutional side, the fund management side, on the private client side, what do you see locally? Is there a lot of excitement and interest in private clients taking stakes and investing in crypto? I mean, there is in the UK for sure. I imagine it's the same in Singapore.
Definitely there is interest within the private space. And many of them are thinking that how to actually get investor in this class. They are very curious about it. I would say that we are still lagging education. Not many people is aware of this. The banks, the financial institutions are also taking a cautious move towards this, but they are also seeing that crypto is here. It's something that they would like to get their hands on, but it's just how they manage the framework of the risk, the governance, etc. Right. So most of the private clients, right, their relationship is still held in the bank. Yeah, with their relationship manager or the investment managers. So this niche asset class, right, I see is something that private clients don't want to miss. They want to include into their main portfolio as a diversification, right? So it depends on really their risk appetite, and it depends on how the risk metric of the financial institutions. Yeah, but I would say that maybe a allocation of the entire portfolio, maybe like 15% to 30%, right? Investing into a few different crypto fund managers and spreading out a few different strategies that might work, right? Yeah, so the only free lunch is diversification, right?
Absolutely, Mike. No, absolutely. And finally, Mike, just looking at how you see the position of Singapore in the region. I mean, it's obviously the primary hub for this kind of activity in Asia. What do you see in terms of other centers? Any other activity going on that you see as interesting, and your perspective on that?
Everywhere is crypto is like everywhere right now. Yeah. Almost every country you have people that is talking about that, right? So it's whether or not it is a scam or it is something that is regulated, right? So I would actually position that Singapore isn't the only place with a crypto ambition. There are locations as diverse as like Dubai, Miami, El Salvador, Malta, and Zug in Switzerland. They're also making efforts on this. Even the governments are also looking at whether how do they regulate this niche asset class, right? So the stakes are very high for our small island nation, but we have already earned a reputation as a global wealth hub. So the city is interested in developing crypto technology, understanding blockchain, smart contracts, and also preparing ourselves for metaverse and also Web 3.0. Yeah.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you, Mike. Just coming to Mike Cham on the legal side. I mean, we heard from Mike Sim there, the growth in fund managers, 400% rise in the number of fund managers, new vehicles being set up. What is it that you see from the legal side, and how do you assist those setting up new entities and running assets in legal structures?
Thanks, David. I was just taking notes when Mike was, sharing earlier. I think he did a really good job. I think I would agree in a large part with Mike. The global asset management industry has been, growing very evidently. I think in Singapore, in fact, our regulations had to keep up with global trends. So in line with the global asset management industry growth, I think Singapore has also welcomed a lot of incoming fund managers, asset managers. We had some interesting incentives for them. So it was first and foremost a more transparent and to provide some clarity on the application framework. How do you qualify to become a fund manager in Singapore? So we had introduced a lighter regime for venture capital fund managers, for instance, in 2017. And I think more recently, in 2020, we passed legislation to allow for a completely new corporate entity to be registered in Singapore, taking reference to very successful offshore fund jurisdictions and fund domiciles. So we did take a reference to Switzerland, Cayman, Hong Kong, and we have come up with the what used to be called the SVAC when it was in a consultation phase, but right now called the variable capital companies. And under the VCC framework, it is quite interesting. I think basically it enables the fund manager to effectively operate an open-ended and closed-ended collective investment scheme. You don't have to keep setting up disparate SPVs and having to wind them down after each project has closed. So I think that I would say is one of the key accelerators. I think
are they expensive to set up, Mike? Are they expensive to set up and run, or how do you look at those vehicles versus other types of structures that you might advise on?
I think so. I've heard comments and feedback. Having set up probably around 6 funds in the VCC phase, and with a few more to be launched this year from spillover from last year. On the question of whether they are efficient or expensive to set up, I think from a tax efficiency perspective, I think the general comment is that under the Income Tax Act, we have always provided, interestingly, tax incentives for fund managers and investors, new investors to Singapore. So I think the 13R, 13X, 13CA schemes have been introduced during the budget, and they have actually been renewed for another 5 years. So I think it has made it very cost effective, and information about these structures are actually generally very easy to get to. And of course, the professional services firms here in Singapore typically have a very wide global outreach. If not a global reach, certainly a regional outreach. So I think Southeast Asian investors and family offices have always looked to Singapore as a place to park their wealth. I think traditionally Indonesia, Malaysia, of course, and Thailand, the high net worth individuals and family offices have always felt very comfortable with Singapore as a jurisdiction. I think if you look further out, China, India, they have each their preferred domiciles, but Singapore is certainly one of those choices. For example, India used to have Mauritius as one of their preferred fund domiciles, but I think increasingly with I think geopolitical changes, the situation may change. Singapore plans to be competitive in this area. So I think cost is ongoing. There will be as more funds get set up in Singapore, there will be more traction, and I think the cost of setting up a VCC fund will be a lot more affordable. If it may be worth mentioning that MAS did provide a grant for each VCC fund to be set up. I think to the tune of 150,000 grand Singapore dollars to incentivize new VCC funds to be set up, and this can be used to offset, for example, your legal costs, tax advice, fund admin.
Very interesting. And there's a comment from Ian Horswell from Sunterra in Jersey on YouTube. Thank you, Ian, for this comment. I would put this to you, Mike Cham, and to Mike Sim. It's just to say that he's seeing opportunities in Jersey to partner with Singapore managers on crypto strategies due to double taxation agreements. Just wondering whether you see the Channel Islands, Jersey as being something that comes up, or in your practice, not so much, or what's your perspective? Have you seen like people looking at double taxation agreements and thinking about favorable jurisdictions in that way?
No, well, from my end, definitely. I think because of the cross-border nature of cryptocurrency firms, they often have to operate in more than one jurisdiction to just to address, I mean, very broadly, you're looking at, Europe, US, and Asia as 3 different centers, and then of course, looking a bit more detailed and with more granularity. Of course, Jersey has been mentioned a couple of times in our course of work. I think we do see that Jersey has maintained that position. DTAs are absolutely it's definitely something that investors should look at, because where you choose as your tax residency, where you're able to get the regulator, the corporate regulator, to support that, is quite important for cryptocurrency firms.
Okay, thank you. Mike Sim, do you see Jersey vehicles being used by some of the managers, or what is there any common thread?
Yeah. So may I know who asked the question?
Ian Horswell from Centera in Jersey. Right.
Oh, Ian Horswell. Right. Thanks for your question, Ian. Yeah. So taking a look at this, right? Well, David, this looks like we need to have another session, and then we need to call in the tax guy together with Mike Chaim. But just candid on that, right? So Mike Chaim has spoken, and he has shared his view. I agree with that. In fact, there are many managers that is at different locations that they have set up their entity. They're also looking at partnering with other managers, because most of these different kind of managers, they have different strategies, right? Yeah, so it definitely open for collaborations. It's just that how are we going to look at the structuring and the formation of the entity? So with that, right, that will be taken offline. Can talk to David on that.
Not a problem. And Mike Chaim, just coming back to you on the family office side, what is it that you see locally on that? Do you see family offices becoming more interested in crypto? What kind of trends do you see in general around family offices in Singapore from your practice?
Well, I think family offices as a term has been on an uptrend, and I think from a Singapore economy perspective, we have always welcomed family offices to consider parking either their assets in Singapore or considering migrating to Singapore. It benefits the wealth managers. But I think this is really an era of defining what Asian family wealth management means. I think from a Swiss perspective, they have the track record. They have got multi-generational wealth. And Singapore being a fairly young nation and where it is based, it's right in the middle of Southeast Asia. We have ease of access from China and India. What a family offices mean in Singapore, should not be simply defined by the quantum. Some people say it's $50 million to be called a single family office. Some people, feel it should be a larger amount, like $100 million. So I think we are fairly open-minded to learn from different jurisdictions. I think the US has the most number of registered family offices, and I think it was in 2008 and 2010. A mutual friend of JD's and mine started the first family office guide in Singapore, and then started having a roundtable. I think Dick Tay was one of the early sponsors of this roundtable. But those are really one of those early baby steps we took to see both private and public collaborations on inviting family offices. Now today, just to add on the snippets we shared on the VCC regime, family offices are in active and advanced discussions with the regulator on allowing family offices to operate VCCs like fund managers. So I think the question would then be, certainly they would seem to operate a bit more like multi-family offices rather than just managing their own wealth. It appears that there will be a couple of high net worth individuals and family offices collaborating. And on the topic of cryptocurrency, certainly I think because it is a new asset, it is arguably a very liquid asset, with each some of the jurisdictions that I've mentioned banning, whether it's mining or trading. For example, India within 2018 to now had a double flip-flop, could be a triple flip-flop on the position on whether Bitcoin mining or trading is allowed. Singapore would again resurface as an option because it is not illegal to own Bitcoin. It is not illegal to mine Bitcoin from a Singapore perspective. I think in recent months, I think it was October of 2021 that Beijing also reversed the decision, or they announced a complete ban on cryptocurrency transactions, including those from mining. And you can imagine just the scale of the number of mining companies in China in a frantic rush to find which jurisdiction can they legitimize cryptocurrency operations and transactions. So I do think we have been either lucky or we have a wide enough regulatory framework that allows us to have this to maintain the narrative, a consistent approach towards digital assets and cryptocurrency. Depending on how you see it, right? I mean, whether it's to be owned by an individual or family office, or do you see it as one of the trading and investment instruments, as Mike Sim has earlier articulated? It could be, for example, put into a Bitcoin fund or a Bitcoin trust index like Grayscale, and everyone can participate in the fund, in that manner.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Mike. We've got a question from Patrick Limo Lin at Mitco in Mauritius. Patrick, thank you for your question. I'll probably bring this to Mike Sim first. It's saying, how are banks reacting to crypto business in Singapore? By his experience in Mauritius and elsewhere, there are challenges generally from many countries. It's a complex issue. There's a lot written about it. Mike, what's your, either Mike Cham or Mike Sim? I mean, is there a sense of how banks are responding to this?
Right. Yeah, maybe I can try to answer that. Thanks, Patrick Lee, for your question. Yeah, so I think the question will be whether there's enough data that is or a framework for the banks to actually weigh the risk on these crypto funds. Although we know that these managers, they have been trying very hard and they actually started out many years ago, right? So currently, there's just like, for example, like mutual funds, right? We have like Morningstar, where we can actually extract those data. We can know like what's the volatility, what's the historical trend data, etc. So that's pretty straightforward for the banks, but not for crypto fund at this current moment. And I would say that if there is a good regulated platform that these crypto funds are being on board to, I think that would be very interesting for the banks to take a different approach and look at that. Yeah, I hope that answers your questions, Patrick. Yeah,
Mike Cham, do you have a view on how the banks in Singapore are coping with this new asset class and how they do business in this field?
Well, I think banks are starting to look at cryptocurrency firms, high net worth investors, people who have done well in Bitcoin trading, as well as DeFi trading as well. But I think the banks are not built to tackle the opportunity and the problem. I think they did try to consider it. I think it was in 2017 when the first fintech hub was formed in Singapore, and I'm sure London, you have a fintech hub as well. And it was originally formed with member banks in Singapore. I think two of the largest top 3 local banks were members of that Association. And I think that back then the position towards Bitcoin was very different, because I think they did fear that it would take away things like remittance fees, currency exchange rates, and so on. I think they do see an opportunity to offer this this instrument to a wider audience. First with the accredited investors. I believe it was the final quarter of 2020 when I think DBS did send well, they did two things. They did introduce to their treasurers members a very interesting memo or newsletter about blockchain. So I think we had some treasurers clients circulating that that is DBS looking at it. And then the second thing they did was they did leak out that they were planning a blockchain exchange, which is quite unusual for a quasi public-owned bank in Singapore of its size. I think quickly following in the footsteps of DBS, and by way of some update, I think DBS have obtained the license to operate a cryptocurrency platform or exchange in the recent 3-4 months. To follow quickly in the footsteps of DBS, I think Standard Chartered, OCBC, have announced plans to do something in the blockchain space, whether it's for accredited investors only or for institutional investors. I think in the region, I think what I found interesting was quite a traditional bank like Commonwealth Bank in Australia have decided that they would focus and open cryptocurrency trading accounts for their customers. So I think the question is a very relevant one, but it's also a very regularly raised question, because I think in 2017, 2018, I think there was a portion of the cryptocurrency segment that got a bit tired about trying to open a bank account for fear that the account closures, because I think the news of account closures spread a bit like wildfire, I think in 2018. But I think the position has taken a big turn right now.
Thank you, Mike. Patrick, I hope that was helpful to you. Keep your questions rolling in, but I'd really love to bring in JD now on the mobile app side. So JD, you're bringing a different perspective to this panel. You've invested in mobile apps and fintech projects before. It'd be great to get a sense from you as to where you see the most exciting opportunities in this emerging space.
Sure, of course. I'd love to talk a little bit about fintech, and also where I would also include the DeFi and also a little bit of GameFi, because these are topics that I'm passionate about.
Excellent.
So for first fintech, I will refer to some of the market data from App Annie. So if I look at the growth of downloads of finance apps globally, we see that mobile apps in the finance category actually had the biggest year globally last year, with over 47.8 billion downloads. And this represented a 24% increase from the previous year in 2020. So amongst these finance apps, guess what? Crypto trading apps actually had by far the biggest downloads growth rate globally over the past 12 months, which was a 582% increase. And this growth rate was followed by other finance subgenres like P2P loans, personal debt, and personal investing. So these are also areas where we can expect some future blockchain disruption. So aside from downloads, I also like to take a look at retention numbers. Retention meaning after the users downloaded, how often do they engage, and how well are they retained in the app. So for instance, actually, although crypto trading apps have the highest download numbers, they also have pretty average user retention rates. So maybe you buy something and then you see it go down, you could sell it off and then you don't touch it ever again and call it a scam. So a fair number of users drop off pretty quickly. In contrast, other subgenres within finance show good retention over time. And these are subgenres like P2P loans again, personal debt, as well as credit scoring. And especially so in the global developing markets, because I do think that in these areas, blockchain and fintech do provide unique value and utility to keep them engaged. So this is for my rough views on fintech in general, and across mobile and blockchain. So for gaming, I think it has huge potential, because gaming audiences, especially for mobile gaming, this exploded over the course of the pandemic. Last year, we saw 83 billion downloads of games, which resulted in over $116 billion in consumer spend. Wow. And over the past 12 months, we also started to see something new. So there were two big hits. We start to see some new big hits in this area we call play to earn games. So the biggest, of course, being Axie Infinity, and there's another one that's up and coming called Thetan Arena. They took the blockchain world by storm. So basically, play to earn games are where you have to invest a little bit to buy some NFTs in the game, and then after that you could win more currency by battling, or you could groom your characters and you could sell off to other people and so on. And there are also businesses that have spawned here where they're called guilds. Gaming guilds are companies that onboard a lot more people who are gamers who are new to crypto, to teach them how to trade, how to open a wallet, how to transfer tokens and so on. And then they take a cut, and also they rent them some expensive equipment, and they take a cut of the revenue they make. So this, I do see huge potential here, because as profitable as it is, the crypto gaming space is still very finite and limited to people who play games and know how to operate crypto wallets. So there is huge upside if this crypto gaming space is able to leverage and tap into the huge global mobile gaming audience, especially so because the huge global mobile gaming audiences, they reside a lot in developing countries, and play to earn kind of delivers more value in developing countries.
Very, very interesting. And I mean, how do you see Singapore's place as a good place to raise investment for new ventures? You know, is there a good kind of VC scene? You know, do the small companies get support to get these ideas off the ground? What do you observe?
Yeah, I could provide some insights, but I also invite Mike Chaim to join in as well. From what I've seen, because I get in touch with a lot of more early stage projects. So I recently, at least for GameFi, there are lots of Vietnamese companies building GameFi projects. And actually, most of them register in Singapore. They register in Singapore in the hope of attracting funds here. So I would say, yes, Singapore is great for attracting a lot of early stage as well as PE or pre-IPO rounds. Singapore, for a small country, we do have a lot of we do have, like, I think a few hundreds of early stage VCs, accelerators, not to mention the family offices. I think there are factors like a stable government, attractive tax regime, and it's also kind of like a gateway to Southeast Asia, where it's relatively comfortable living and so on. Yeah, so I do think these are some factors, but of course, on the flip side, it also depends on what your startup is building. How much do you want to base your entire team and all your resources here? I mean, does Singapore have the specific talent you're looking for? Can you scale? For instance, it will be quite difficult to scale if you're trying to hire 100 engineers. You could do that easily in other countries around, but not here.
Okay, very, very interesting. And I mean, how do you see blockchain technology disrupting certain industries? Which industries do you think are ripe to be disrupted that perhaps at the moment it's still in its early phases? What's your view down the road into the future as to how that is going to change the way business is done in many sectors?
I think it's still very early. I mean, with GameFi, with DeFi, we're still early. It's like when Uber first launched, they had a lot of backlash from the traditional taxi industry. We're at the same stage. Like Ubisoft, a huge gaming company, wanted to turn to transition one of the big IPs into NFT gaming, and a lot of gamer fans objected to that. You know, so there's still this kind of stuff coming along, and there's also, like Mike said, both Mike said, there's the banks and the regulatory bodies are still adapting to what fintech can do, what DeFi can do. So, I mean, let's start with, say, for DeFi. I think it's a game changer for blockchain. Some of these applications for staking, for yields, for loans, I do actually think that right now it's right now here where we are today, 2022. It's different from 2017, 2018. Right now, these days, because of all this utility that actually works, in an extreme case, even if Bitcoin totally crashed, I would still think that all these coins, some of these fintech tokens, for instance, there's one I'm a fan of, it's called Terra UST, which is a stable coin. It offers 19% annual percentage yield. And this has been stable throughout last year and even in recent times of crypto volatility. So all these applications that actually work and work independently of Bitcoin price were not really around during the last market crash in 2017, 2018, where most cryptos were layer one technologies that just promised we have the fastest transactions, high volume transactions, cheap transactions, but there were no real applications aside from speculation. So I do think because of real utility, although it's not adopted by the masses yet. But we are at the stage where this could be a game changer. And as for GameFi, what I mentioned just now, play to earn is playing games not just as a pastime, but you can actually make real money. Like Axie Infinity, they changed a lot of people's lives in the Philippines. People who used to drive cabs or grab taxis, they make a few $100s a month. They could make $2,000 USD from this, and this totally changed their life. So this is game changing. Okay, and of course this is still, like I said, restricted to a small group of people who know games and know crypto, and that's why there are these companies called gaming guilds that are teaching all these people how to farm, how to transfer, how to and all these things. And I believe there will be a lot more innovative business models to come because of this. And and I think the key to unlock GameFi would be to through mobile gaming, because mobile gaming is already huge. I think the main challenge is that people don't know how to use cryptocurrency wallets on the mobile device. It's much more difficult to do it on a small screen, especially if you're a new beginner, as compared to doing it on the browser. I mean, just look at MetaMask. I think it's a great wallet. But look at the MetaMask app. It has a rating of 3.2 stars out of 5. Not from me, but from the users worldwide.
Yeah.
Okay. So big upside.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, JD. I want to bring in Hui Ji. We talked there just a little bit with JG around blockchain, and I'd be interested to get your perspective, Hui Ji, on how you see the ecosystem in Singapore around blockchain.
Yeah, so I guess one of the things in Singapore is that we are not always the fastest innovators, but we're definitely one of the fastest followers. And you realize very much in history, if we look at a lot of the different so-called uptake of technologies or certain concepts within the region, when we first started very much, say, with digital banking, when Hong Kong started pushing for digital banking, Singapore waited very much for that to really effectively compete. And we came out very quickly to actually do our own digital banking push. Similarly, when we talk about Facebook, Libra launching so-called their global currency to a certain extent, China launching their central bank digital currency, right? Project Ubin in Singapore, it's very much being kicked off as well concurrently. And I guess one of the reasons why we are able to do that so quickly is because we, as an ecosystem, do a lot of preparational work. Right? We always prepare when we see any forms of trends that's actually upcoming. And we do a lot of work so that if any of them actually do take off, we would immediately, very quickly be able to come on board that. Very much similarly to the banking question that was being asked, when it crossed the tipping point where they actually saw that crypto would be here to stay to a certain extent, you'll notice that suddenly all the banks started rushing into it, with DBS being one of the first, and following very quickly by all the other banks, because one of them having it would then lead towards an entire avalanche of all the other banks not wanting to lose out. So I guess as Singapore, being a very, very small country and a population, people, I guess, always see Singapore as a hub, as a hub that would be able to outreach towards the rest of the region, as a hub that would be able to be like a regional headquarters, very much to be able to organize all the different professional services, the banking services, the entire talent pool that you have, primarily because we are a highly international country with a talent base that can be very regional in terms of communications, as well as working with different groups of people. So I guess from this particular standpoint, that has made Singapore an ecosystem where we become highly flexible with a really trusted workforce, with good infrastructure, that would be able to attract a lot of the funds into Singapore, and more importantly, a very clear regime and regulations, or better, clearer regulations comparatively, that allows a lot of companies to actually kickstart. And I guess it's because of this, Singapore managed to attract a lot of people to set up their headquarters here as a point to expand around the region.
JD mentioned the challenges of having large numbers of headcount in Singapore because of the physical geography of the jurisdiction. Do you find that then people set up certain like high value headquarter type activities with development done elsewhere? Is that rather than having lots of large teams on site, is that a constraint on its development, or how do you see that impacting?
I guess I guess the development space has changed quite a lot over the years, and primarily so with the entire COVID as well as pandemic situation. Well, technically now we are very much a global workforce. Even medium or smaller enterprises can work 24/7 anywhere, considering everyone's working from home. So I guess what is a huge advantage from a Singapore perspective is that traditionally, as a Singapore workforce, we are typically more organized. We are typically more so-called having a strong means of being able to do project management and having so-called high standards of quality control and things of the likes as well. And coupling that with the regulational aspects as well as the professional talent and workforce, I think that actually gives Singapore a very strong so-called edge in terms of having the HQ over here. Yet at the same time, being able to have many other what we call ODCs, or offshore development centers around the region to work with in the areas that every single so-called developers within that country might be strong in. The fundamental fact in development, it's a talent game. You can't get one developer that knows everything from an end-to-end perspective, whether it's from development, from front end to back end to database to security and so on and so forth. So many a time, you always depend on working with multiple different talents that would be able to deliver the final end product. So in this particular aspect, I guess you won't be coming to Singapore to hire like hundreds and hundreds of people, developers, of course, because the cost base is just too high and you might not have the full fledged of talents because everyone's all snatching for the same talent pool. But it's always a good place to start and always a good place to put your headquarters, and having so-called your project managers, your coordinators, your architects over here that liaise with many other different regional offices to deliver the full product.
Extremely interesting. Thank you for that. And just with a bit of blue sky thinking about the blockchain and going in the future, is there any industry that it won't affect and disrupt? What do you see for the future of blockchain technologies in Asia, but also on a global basis?
Well, I mean, I'm super highly passionate about blockchain as well, super bullish on it, right? If I'll summarize it in one sentence, what my perspective is that I would say that blockchain is to trust very much what the internet has been to information. And the challenge we have today is that we are living in a less trustful world. We're getting more scams, we're getting more frauds. We're not able to even trust the videos that we're seeing in front of us because sometimes the AI technology is just so strong. So I guess in this particular aspect, blockchain can be used in many areas, but fundamentally, like any other core technology, it will always impact certain industries more than others. It will certainly have better value adds in certain areas more than others. So fundamentally, the areas that would be having the highest value adds, I believe, are in areas where data immutability or permanence is highly important, where the areas of provenance or tracking of where certain goods might be coming from would be very important. So anything literally from like certificates or certificates of origin or anything that actually has got to do with logistics or the origination of food definitely would have a high impact. And other areas would, of course, include in the areas of data mobility or interoperability or transactions, because primarily that's where you want to make sure you have no double spending and of the likes. So anything got related to financial transactions, I think would be great. So industries such as like education, industries such as pharmaceutical or medicine, industries such as logistics or the financial space, I think would have high levels of usage, primarily from a blockchain perspective. But when you add in the tokenization-based model, the crypto-based model, that adds in so much more, whether we are looking at some of the key trends that really has grown quickly in the financial space, in the gaming space. These are areas that, of course, would benefit greatly. And we start throwing in technologies like smart contracts that even expands the entire space even more.
And I mean, how can investors get exposure to those applying blockchain technology? Those who recognize that this is going to disrupt? What way do you see people being able to participate in that? Is it through, are there listed firms that are innovating in this way? Is it private equity? Is it about just, within a diversified portfolio, backing certain companies? What is it that you would see for those who want to get exposure to these companies?
Yeah, so I guess the interesting thing is that it's still really very much at the early stage of people actually still adopting blockchain. And fundamentally, from a crypto perspective, crypto is the one that has really surged entire growth in the area so far. So there are still a couple of listed companies out there that it's very much a little bit in the space, but it's still very much early at the start. So I guess for people who get the most amount of exposure within this space, primarily a lot of them is still looking within the crypto space versus the traditional so-called components of listed companies of the likes. However, that being said, there are a lot of companies that are coming up just at this point of time. And it's just very much like following the entire hype cycle, right? There'll be the early adopters, there'll be the mass adopters, and there'll be trailing adopters. So I guess in this particular space, the crypto consumer component has really very much adopted really quickly, whereas from a business, so-called commercial standpoint or enterprise standpoint, is still lagging in that particular aspect. So I guess for people who want to really embark upon it is to take a look a little bit more probably at the crypto side of things while constantly monitoring what might be some of the big companies that are coming up, because not too many around. So probably if they hear about it, it might be one of those fields that are just starting in the entire space itself.
Okay, and finally, how will the metaverse, affect our lives in the future? That we've seen in the press in the UK, and obviously with Facebook and things launching its platforms, there's more public awareness around the metaverse. What's your view well into the future as to how that might change our lives?
So the metaverse is going to be something that I believe strongly in the next number of years is going to be huge, right? Because primarily, we, to a certain extent, as much as we have abundance, we are limited by physical space. But the metaverse is unlimited. It's very much unlimited towards the mind that you actually have and any forms of programming that you do that can replicate the entire growth itself. The question then people ask is that what is so-called fundamental value, or what would be a fundamental value of metaverse? Like on Decentraland, there are a couple of celebrities that recently bought, and like one pixel was selling for like 780 so-called US dollars per square pixel, right? Versus like per square feet within the physical space itself. So why I think the metaverse will be huge is because there is unlimited opportunities very much according to the imagination that you have. But that being said, what is actually, if we take at some forms of indicators, what is actually some forms of growth within the area, as well as what are some other use cases that might have actually good use case? So if we talk about growth in the area, if we take some statistics, there's actually a demand for more than 10 million VR headsets over the last number of months. And you put that in perspective, that's like the entire install base of PlayStation 5. So if you do a comparison of that globally, if you imagine and compare that to one of the most famous console games out there in terms of number of so-called devices they have versus the last number of months of demand for virtual reality headsets, you actually naturally realize that the trend is coming in and the growth is coming in really, really hot. Now, in addition to that, from an actual so-called use case perspective, you see like Facebook rolling out recently Horizons workrooms. It's actually a space where you can go into with like your Oculus Rift and essentially with your VR headset, and essentially you can have like the Zoom that we are having now, but an avatar of all the different participants. We're able to interact with them. We are able to be in our physical space, map out our desk, walk around our desk, work on the whiteboard collaboratively within that space, open up multiple different screens or monitors, and be able to work in a virtual space, not only with 1 or 2 or 3 people, but we are able to work with multiple small groups concurrently. So rather than one person talking right now, there might be 3 or 5 other people within that virtual space that's actually interacting. So I do believe strongly that there's actual real-world use cases for that, and effectively that will grow very significantly.
Fantastic. Well, that's terrific insight. We're coming to the end of our hour now, gentlemen. Thank you for this discussion. I'm just going to come to each of you for a closing thought, comment, as we wrap up this session. So Mike Sim, if I could come to you, is there a takeaway thought for the audience? Is there anything you'd like to respond to any of what the other panelists have said?
Well, the takeaway thought, I know that today is Friday. So in Singapore, usually the Fridays is more like a relaxed session and a chill out for most of the people. But my friends all has taken their time, and including yourself, David. So very thank you for everyone for coming in, and also those audiences that is there. So if there's one thing to take away, right, it's still the thought that if the audience is going to invest, just take a deep breath and think about, if you have $10, how much are you willing to lose, right? Because crypto can nosedive 30 to 50% in just one day. Are you willing to stomach that risk? Yeah. So
Okay.
That's my takeaway. Thank
you, Mike. Mike Cham, closing thought takeaway point. Oh, you're on mute.
Well, thank you. Thanks, David, and thanks, Mike. I think we're seeing a lot of change to the legal and regulatory status. It is not uncommon to see term sheets, featuring stables instead of monies in a Swiss account today. So I think my thoughts on where cryptocurrency will disrupt certainly gaming and certainly investing. I think most term sheets that I see today have some form of tokens involved as an alternative form of return or distribution in specie for investors. So I think hopefully with the technology moving to Web3 and the metaverse, hopefully all of us will be more enriched for it. Yeah.
Fantastic. JD, any closing thoughts, comments?
Yep. So again, DeFi and GameFi, so they're not ever present right now. They face some backlash now from incumbents, just as any new disruptive technology would. But it is something that's keeping a lot of big company CEOs at night, awake at night. So I think it may be a year or maybe 2 years or 5 years, but in time to come, I do think this will be everywhere.
Fantastic. Ray G, a final closing thought from you.
Well, I guess the idea is always to get in early, to be aware of what's happening out there in the market. Because, as what Mike Sim said, if he knew it was $30 at a point of time, and maybe now multi-million billionaire. So I guess sometimes it's really about getting in early just to test out and see what and how things will actually pan out. Not to go all in, but always start early so that you have that luxury of time to better test and go through a few cycles that gets you more experience within the area. It's definitely coming. The question is which would be the ones that eventually will grow significantly. So the earlier you get in, higher chance that you can learn from those lessons and the mistakes and that so-called opportunities to really grow to something that's significant down the road.
Well, terrific. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you to the panel, and I wish you a good day and a